All right, welcome to the only video in this top 100 theory that anyone is actually going to watch. The top 10. The only 10 that matter. If you could only have 10 games, these would be my 10. Maybe or maybe not. I might pick some other games that would be technically ranked lower for a little bit more variety. But let's be honest, I made 10 videos so you could watch exactly one of them, and this is the one you're going to watch. So, thank you for watching this one video and none of the other 9. So let's get into the top 10. I'm going to try to keep it a little briefer this time since I think the segments have been getting progressively a little longer each time. So, all right, let's look at them. All right, so starting off my top 10 at number 10 is a game that just barely displaced Viticulture, which I featured at 11, and that is another winemaking game called Vinhos. Vinhos is my highest ranking Vita Lacerda game, and I have a suspicion that in 2 or 3 years' time it won't be. Not because I don't like this one, but because I have a degree of familiarity with this one, which lets me put it higher up on my list that I think I will in that time have with those other games. But this is an excellent one, and this might be the one that I would choose to try to introduce someone who hasn't played any Vita Lacerda games at all. Now, mostly the people I'm going to be introducing these to are going to be people who play a lot of board games because, boy, oh boy, are there a lot of mechanics in this game. This is previously ranked at 12, so very slightly inched up, but that's actually pretty impressive considering that breaking into my top 10 is actually quite hard at this point. Its weight is a 10 out of 10, even though this is the easy one of the ones I've played. I heard Escape Plan is also easier, and it plays 1 to 4 players. If you like Viticulture, I have no idea whether or not you'll like this game. If you're going to play one winemaking game, I would say go play Viticulture. But I like this one better. It's a much more crunchy, interesting puzzle with a worker placement mechanism that involves handing money off to other players depending on whether they're on the space you want and paying money depending on how far you move on this 3x3 grid of possible actions. There's just so many things to manage, and there's really only like 13 turns in which to accomplish everything, which is quite um, mind blowing considering uh, how that this is not a quick game. It's probably going to take you at least a couple of hours to play, if not more. But it's just got so many things going on it that are interesting to me. The production quality is great. All of the Eagle Griffin, Vita Lacerda, Ian O'Toole games look great, and the component quality is top notch. There's a decent amount of theme. It really does feel like you're managing a winery. There's so many good things I have to say about it, and if this is the bar to which a game must pass in order to get into my top 10, that's astoundingly high. I cannot recommend this game enough to people who have the capacity to appreciate it, which is admittedly a fairly small percentage of the population. But if you're in that percentage, you really owe it to yourself to give this one a try, as well as several other Vita Lacerda games. But start with this one. Start with Vinhos. This is the deluxe edition. There was an older edition that I believe was cleaned up. This one has the original version available to play in it, which I haven't tried, and the revamped version, which is the one I'm familiar with. I might get around someday to trying the older version of the game just to see how it compares with the version I'm most familiar with. But I really don't feel it needs to be messed with much at all. Amazing game. Starts off the top 10 with a bang. This is a really heavy box, and it's quite bulky. If you're attracted to complex games at all, try this one. It's an outstanding thematic Euro. Number 10, Vinhos. Now, if I was to pick a game that I think may be the most likely to fall out of my top 10, it might be this one, but it's just I get to play this game decently often, and every time I do, it just brings a smile to my face. This is my guilty pleasure game. This is number 9, Shadowhunters. Shadowhunters is a game that has been re-implemented as Fangs, which is not a theme I like because it sounds like they're basically aping Twilight for thematic material, whereas this one is aping anime and manga. It's a social deduction game where you don't know who's on whose team, and you might also be an independent person whose objective has nothing to do with which team wins. Uh, it says 4 to 8 on the box. Play it at no fewer than 5. It is previously ranked at 10, so it's gone up a spot. And its weight is a 3. It's kind of like a heavy party game, might be a good way to put it. And it plays essentially 5 to 8 players, because 4 players doesn't have the non-team player in it, which creates a lot of the chaos because you don't know exactly what that person's going for and who is on that team. This is just a lot of random nonsense that happens over the course of the game. There's a little bit of die, roll, and move in the game. There's a little bit of sort of roll to attack, and you want the dice to be friendly to you, and sometimes they won't be, and different things can result, and you can draw a card that really helps you, or you can draw a card that really hurts you, and there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do to mitigate that. But it's also within sort of a time frame that I think is reasonable for random nonsense to happen, which is that usually this takes 45 minutes to an hour to play, which admittedly is a little on the high side for random chaos happening. But the random chaos that happens here is exemplary random nonsense. I think this sort of occupies a place in my gaming life that Cosmic Encounter occupies for others. I haven't had as much traction getting the people around me who I play games with to play Cosmic Encounter as much. So this is sort of, I think it's got a similar vibe, having played Cosmic Encounter once and enough to get onto my top 100. I really like that one as well. The sort of slightly more complex than a typical party game, but sort of party-ish in its feel, a little bit longer and a little bit more strategic, but still wild swings of luck, and there's still the negotiation element. I think that works tremendously well as a package, and this is just the one that I'm familiar with. So, yeah, now that I think about it, I wonder if this and Cosmic Encounter may end up switching spots in terms of where they are relative on my list, because I could see if I got a lot more plays of Cosmic Encounter in and started integrating the expansion stuff, that it could rise. But that's speculation for another day. If you want a cool social deduction game that is just going to have some laughter and levity and chaos, if those things sound like fun, this is a really good one, and it's probably my favorite nonsense in a box game to date. So that is my number 9, Shadowhunters. My number 8 is Targi. Targi was previously ranked 6th on my list, so it slipped slightly. Its weight is about a 4, and it's a 2-player only game. Targi is a worker placement game that is heavy on the tactics, light on the theme, and terribly, terribly interesting to play for about an hour. It is a game that you sort of get tricked into thinking is more of a light, casual, while away the afternoon kind of game than it actually is. There's a lot going on that is fairly intense in terms of every move feeling like it has an impact on the game. There are always opportunities to do something clever, and then there's just a heck of a lot of taking things away from other players, because there are essentially 12 spots you can go to. Okay, let me put it this way. There are 6 spots you can go to, out of which there's 2 options. You can either go row A on the left or right, row B on the left or right, row C on the left or right, or row D on the top or bottom, row E top or bottom, and row F top or bottom. But if you go in row F on the top, the other player can't go on the bottom. So you've basically sectioned off that entire column. And if the other player then goes row B in the middle, that whole row is sectioned off. And the reason why that matters is because you're making intersection points between your meeples that are over on the sides, on the left and the right, and the ones that are on the top and the bottom. You draw lines, and where they intersect, you get the card in the middle where that intersects. So if you're going for something specific in the middle, it takes at least 2 of your 3 workers that you use in the round to get into 2 specific spots. So even if you go first, the other player can see that you're going for it and specifically block you at the row you don't want to go to. There's a workaround spot that kind of mitigates that so you can move on to something if you don't get it outright. But that's only if your opponent doesn't decide to take that as well. So it's a really tricky, tactical, tense back and forth game that is an amazing way to spend an hour. As much as I want these more grandiose Euro strategy experiences, sometimes I just want something that I can set up relatively quickly, play for in an hour or less. I think you can get it done a little faster if you're experienced with the game, but probably not less than 45 minutes, I would say. I also have the expansion. The expansion is pretty good, but I'm almost equally happy playing either the base game vanilla version or with the expansion. It's just usually with the expansion. I haven't played it as much, so I would need to review the rules a little bit before I play the expansion, so it might just get played a little bit less because of that. But it does add some interesting things, and it's worth taking a look at because it sort of it almost feels like it could have been launched as a side like alternative target game, because the economy of how you're placing your workers is fairly substantially changed, and then there's some wild resources that are involved that change up the game significantly as well. Amazing 2-player only game. Light enough that I can usually convince my wife to play it as long as we have, an hour or to at least an hour to an hour and a half to kill. And that is my number 8 Targi. So let me begin this one by telling a small story. I used to really love a game called Kalis. It was a 10 out of 10 for me at a time in which I had 2, maybe 3 10s out of 10s. Kalis was one of them. The game I'm about to talk about was another. And the third at that time probably would have been Keyflower, which, spoiler alert, that might be coming up pretty soon too. The thing is about Kalis was I went back to it after a few years, and I was like, this is still pretty good, but I don't know if it's better than some of the other high-end Euro games that I've been playing. So it's dropping for me, and it has dropped on my list, so much so that a re-implementation and improvement upon the Kalis system is now only somewhere in about the middle of the list. I forget exactly where I put Kalis 1303, which was the re-implementation. The difference between Kalis and this game is that every time I go back to this game, even if it's been years between plays, is that it's every bit as good as I remember every time I play it. And I still haven't played with the expansion stuff, which I still haven't played. I've been going on for too long. This one is my number 8, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is... sorry. This is my number 7. Puerto Rico was previously ranked at 8, so it's gone up a spot. Its weight is about an 8 out of 10 and plays 3 to 5 players. Okay, so I was originally planning on talking about my number 8, but I grabbed Puerto Rico instead, and that's my number 7, so it's fine. I will do some editing wizardry, and they will show up in the correct order. Puerto Rico is a game that I just keep going back to, and it's every bit as good as I remember. It's a role selection game. You choose a role, you get to do a certain action of your choosing, plus you get a benefit in doing that action. So if it's the action that lets you build something, you get to build it cheaper than everyone else. But everyone else gets to do that action as well. So you can try to specifically choose to do actions at such a time that it's not going to benefit the rest of the table very much. and then everyone chooses one, and then the turn order of who selects first rotates around the table, I believe clockwise, but it could be counterclockwise. I guarantee it's one of the two. And figuring out how to time these things in relationship to each other so that you get the widest range of get money when you desperately need it, because money is very tight in this game. Um, take actions that don't overly benefit other players at critical points in the game. Build your economy. Pick the special powers that are going to help you the most. It's a tremendous package, and I will probably never be a Puerto Rico shark, as I've heard it called. I'm likely never, because I just don't have the interest to try to get that good at this game. I would much rather play this at a casual level so that I will occasionally bring it out with my friends and family. And we play a game, and I go, wow, that was a great strategy game that was just so tightly designed. And the thing is, this was my first game that I rated a 10 out of 10. This was the first game that I identified as, this is my favorite game. If I get to choose any game to play, I want to play Puerto Rico. And part of that was like when I was just starting playing board games and was learning about such a thing as Board Game Geek. I believe at the time it was ranked either 2 or 3 on Board Game Geek overall at that point. This would have been around 2010, maybe slightly earlier, maybe slightly later. So it's fantastic. It's amazing. I have not cooled on it at all. I play it less than I used to, but I was never really at a point where I was playing it like 3 or 4 times a year. Like maybe at max I was playing 3 or 4 times a year. That would be about it. But I was never playing like monthly or bi-monthly or anything like that. And there are just other games I like better. 6 of them, in fact. That's pretty impressive. For a game to be this good, and I still have games that I like better than that, it's amazing. I don't see this ever leaving my collection, except maybe this specific copy. If there's a deluxe version that I like, I think there's a Puerto Rico 1893 or something like that. I haven't looked in too deeply into that copy. Maybe I get that and I get rid of this version. But I think Puerto Rico is going to be in my collection in some form for a long, long time, and I will be thrilled if I have a chance to play it at pretty much any point. Now, if they could just figure out a way to do it solo, that would be great. Also, there apparently is a 2-player mode. Because when I was reading the instructions when I was first learning the game, it didn't seem like there was a 2-player mode in that box. Maybe I gotta look more closely and figure out what the 2-player variant looks like. I've heard it's all right, so maybe I can convince my wife to play with me at some point. Unlikely, but that is my number 7. My number 7, Puerto Rico. So have you heard that there's this amazing tile laying game where you're taking pieces and then you're putting them onto a grid and you're paying a certain number of tiles in order to put them onto the grid depending on where you go on that grid, and you're making patterns, and depending on how you line them up, you're getting different amounts of points, and it's pretty abstract, but it sort of has a Portuguese theme of it's kind of like tiles. It's an amazing game, and if you're thinking I'm talking about Azul, you're close. I'm talking about Azul Summer Pavilion. This is the best version of Azul. Fight me on this. If you think the original is better, it's probably because you haven't played this one. Why haven't you played this one? It's better. Look, Azul is a terrific game and solidly deserves a spot on my top 100. I don't remember exactly where I put it, but I presume somewhere between 50 and 80. And deserved kudos to that game. It's an amazing game. This one is just so much better. It's not significantly more complicated, although it is a little bit more, and I might want to introduce people to the first Azul game if I think they're going to struggle with any sort of complexities or intricacies in gaming. Introduce them to the original Azul first, and then say, hey, here's a different variant on that formula. And then it's not that bad because it just adds everything that it adds something significant. Adding wild tiles, significant. Adding the ability to carry over up to 4 extra tiles, but no more of your choice into the next round, significant. Having the wild shift from round to round, that's really important. Um, the way the wilds change how drafting works, really important. The bright and pretty colors are just, as I will say, Azul is very attractive. This just looks brighter, cleaner, and more colorful. It looks more like a stained glass pattern on a stained glass window pattern, and that's terrific. I love bright, shiny colors, especially when I'm playing something that's a little bit lighter. But everything that is changed here just makes for a more compelling experience, down to the fact that the patterns that you're making on your player board actually allow you to gain additional tiles of your choice from an offer as you put them on. So there's an incentive to just rush more tiles out there in certain spots in order to gain tiles that you can then use to get even more points and more things on your board. This is an amazing game. I love this so much. Now, I do think it steps a little bit away from the simplicity, but there's of the original Azul that means that the original Azul may always still be the Azul for the masses. But I think the small steps it takes away from that simplicity into a greater degree of complexity have massive benefits in offering you more strategy, more moments of just going, yes, I got something done. Uh, those steps were much more significant in Queen's Garden, and I'm not sure the gains are there. I don't know if that will show up in my top 100. It's too new to me. But what I will tell you is this is not losing the mantle for best Azul game anytime soon. Best one by a mile. If you haven't played it, play it. You can play the first one if you really want to first. It's still a really strong game. But this is the one that is a treasure of game design. All right, that is my number 6. Previously ranked at 7, so it's gone up very slightly. Weight is a 3 and plays 2 to 4 players. That is number 6, Azul Summer Pavilion. Okay, so a little bit of an explanation first. This is my number 5, The Resistance, and I'm going to say it was previously ranked at 4, and we'll talk about that in a second. Its weight is a 2 out of 10. There's just a little bit of complexity. It's not quite a dirt simple game, and it will play 5 to 10 players. So what I previously had on this list that I'm recording as the previous entry is The Resistance Avalon. I've sort of worn through my copy. The cards are a little, yeah. They're it's not unplayable, but it's not the best shape either. This one, on the other hand, is I bought it used, but I did get it, and then I also got the expansion that allows it to basically function the same as Resistance Avalon. So I'm putting this one in place of Resistance Avalon because anytime I would have played Resistance Avalon, I'm now playing this copy. Plus, I've gotten additional expansions to it, which was really my motivation for making the transition, because as far as I knew, there wasn't the same level of expansions available for Resistance Avalon as there was for just vanilla Resistance. So the thing is, it's a different theme, but it's an identical game, and if you like one, you're going to like the other. If you hate one, you're going to hate the other. Resistance is great. It's a social deduction game. It's the most straightforward one that I have, that I play often, and all you do is just accuse each other the entire time, and you can play it with almost anyone. Maybe people who don't take being lied to very well shouldn't play it. Sometimes it's hard to suss out who those people are before you start the game with them. uh, it's so good. If you don't know what I mean by social deduction game, I would suggest a little bit of light Googling, maybe watching a few videos of people playing it, to kind of gain a sense of it. You should be able to tell by watching people play it whether or not it's a game for you. I embrace the chaos. I don't need things to be under control, especially when the game is going to be about half an hour, or like it never feels like it tops out at more than 45 minutes, even if objectively I've played some games that have lasted an hour. It never feels long, even if it was, even if it did run long, it wasn't going to feel long, if that makes sense. Um, I don't even know what to say. I like being lied to. I actually like being lied to more than I like lying to other people, to be honest. And I I I think there's something to be said for if you're being tasked with lying to the other players, you have to do it in essentially as honest a way as you can in order to gain trust. That really does seem to be the path to victory. The Resistance is a great game. It's not for everyone. If you can't keep a cool head, there are other games that you can play that aren't going to tick you off nearly as much as this one, but it's so much fun. How can I resist this? It's going to be in play forever, unless I get a social deduction game that just out of no replaces that. But that's not on the immediate horizon. So, for now, The Resistance is a terrific game. Highly recommend it. With the caveats already mentioned. My number 5, The Resistance. All right, time for one of the newer members of my top 10. This is my number 4, Brass Birmingham. Brass Birmingham was previously ranked at 5, so it's moved up a spot. Impressive when it was already in my top 5 to begin with. Its weight is a 9, and that has more to do with the fact that there are rules that are easy to confuse with each other rather than the sheer number of rules in the game, which uh, is not insubstantial, but it's also not incredibly overwhelming, especially when compared to something like Vinos, which we've already talked about. Brass Birmingham is a game that has a time limit on it. You feel like you're just starting to get momentum just as you're coming to the end. It's a game that sort of pulls the rug out from under you. Now, it does let you know that it's going to pull the rug out from under you at a certain point in the game and then make you restart, depending on how far along you got in building your buildings, because all the level 1 buildings are going to get swept and all of the connections are going to get swept. But if you can get some level 2 or higher buildings, then you can keep those ones, and those can potentially score twice. But that's kind of hard to do within the moments in the first half of the game. Then there's this really interesting debt mechanism where you can gain money at any time, but you have to go down in your level of income, and you start with no income. You start with a small amount of money and no income, and you're expected to, from that, turn that into a profitable empire of connected buildings over a large span of the map. It plays amazingly at 2, 3, and 4. Happily played at all three of those player counts. Maybe I have a slight preference for 3 among those possible options, but I would just as happily play it at 2 or 4. My main criticism is not even of the game itself, it's just the fact that there's no solo mode. Um, this, I think, came out only 5 years ago. That's well within the window of like games where Euro games were starting to be expected to have solo modes if they were coming out at that point. I understand it's a re-implementation of an older game, but then they specifically launched the newer version, which is the one I know, and Brass Lancashire, which I haven't played, which is apparently virtually identical to the original Brass, just a prettier version. Um, so given that, why not put a solo mode at least in the new one? Like purists can have their old version of the game that doesn't have the solo mode, but for those of us who are like jumping into Brass now, which is the camp I'm firmly in, uh, I kind of want to be able to play it by myself. I know there's always fan versions, but those can be kind of spotty in terms of which ones are worthwhile and which ones are not. It's an amazing game. I could see this creeping even higher on my list, honestly, encroaching on the top three, which have been kind of set in stone for multiple years now. My top three have been my top three in some order for, I uh, think at least 5 years. I think my current top three, and I think I could see this possibly knocking one or two of them out. I don't see it toppling my number one, but we'll get to that. So that is an amazing game. I know some people bounce off of it, but that's just because you're inferior people and you're not really worthy of life. If you were, you'd like this game. The fact that you don't shows that you're not worthy of existence. That's a joke, but sometimes I feel that way. My number four, Brass Birmingham. All right, my number three, Scythe. Scythe was previously ranked at 3, although I have some recollection that it might have actually been at 2, so I don't know if that's just an error in my notes. Its weight is about an 8, and it plays 1 to 5 players. Scythe is great. It does have a solo mode, which is nice. I think it was just that sort of that incoming wave of, if you're a heavier Euro game, you should probably have a solo mode involved. And it's fairly good, although it is kind of at the high end of complexity for what I'm willing to tolerate in managing an a solo opponent. But mostly this is a game I want to play at 3 and 4 players. 5 is fine too. Technically, you could play it at 6 or 7, but you shouldn't, I don't think. Um, it's a very smooth experience. You pick one of 4 slots, you do the top action, and if you can, you do the bottom action as well. At the start, you're just doing the top actions because you don't have the resources to pay for the bottom actions. All the bottom actions have a resource cost. So you're trying to generate the resources in order to do those bottom actions, but sometimes the top action that you need to do is different than the bottom action that you need to do, but you're ultimately making a choice of like one of 4 different possibilities, and usually it's only one of 3 possibilities because you usually can't select the one that is the exact same slot that you picked the last turn. Turns are quick to execute. It flows around the table quickly. It accelerates at a nice sort of upward exponential arc where it's slower, then a little less slow, and then quicker, and then woo, and then just sort of a rush towards the end. Uh, Again, not a game I would want to play competitively. Um, I just don't know if it would be as fun to try to start memorizing like build patterns in order to maximize starting um, positions and try to win the game that way. Um, I do think it is a game that is very group dependent in that if you play with more confirmed Euro gamers that are used to sort of having their own things and just running their own little economic engines, they're going to be playing focusing on their player board and not really trying to go after each other. Whereas someone who is a little bit more aggressive in nature, maybe comes from an Ameritrash or wargaming background, is going to play this game and just go after other people and trying to steal their resources. And maybe the Euro gamers should play in their group of Scythe, and the war gamers and Ameritrash players should play in their other group over there. Because I think the real heartache is when you try to mix those two play styles in this game. Because someone's going to get taken aback by the fact that they were attacked if they're not expecting it. Um, Now, granted, I'm in that Eurogamer group. If I'm just trying to build my engine, I'm maybe looking to attack a person once in the game, if there's a real opportunity for it. Um, but Scythe is a little sprinkling of several different things. It's a Euro game at the core, but there's a little bit of wargaming. There's a little bit of randomness, a little bit of combat, um, terrific art, amazing components. Um, there's just a lot to like here. It's just a well designed, smooth package, and think some people are kind of over this game by now, and I'm very not. Maybe it's just because I don't get to play the games I like as much as I would want to. But it's a game I love, and I foresee it being in my collection for a long time. To the point where I'm actually thinking about buying the box specifically to house this and the expansions that are sitting over on my shelf over there. That this fairly substantial box, like this is not small. That's pretty big. Um, can't quite hold anymore, and it's kind of getting frayed at the edges there. You can see the legendary box to put everything in. Maybe I might pick it up. It's just hard to justify something that's just a box for I don't even know how much it is. Probably like $40 Canadian at least. Anyways, terrific game. Would recommend if you are one of the people that hasn't had a chance to play it yet. I just think it's a really cool game, and I think most people are there with me on that. My number 3, previously ranked, yeah, number 3, Scythe. Okay, so my number 2 is a game that, along with Puerto Rico, and my current number 1, is one of only 3 games that I've ever considered my favorite board game, at least in the era of me playing more modern board games. And that is Keyflower. Keyflower is a game I just got to play because I bought a couple of expansions, and I got to try one of those expansions. Was that last night? Yeah, that was last night. The expansion, by the way, was quite good. Not mind-blowing, doesn't completely alter the game, but I think it allows the core game of Keyflower to shine just a little bit brighter, which is sort of what I'm hoping for in expansion, is that it is a marginal improvement on something I already quite like. Keyflower is a game that is difficult. I was asked at the game to compare it to uh, another game to give it some context as to what it might be like. And all I could say was that it was like other Euro games in that it's clearly drawing from those pool of mechanisms and how it. So it's drawing from common mechanisms like using auctioning mechanisms and worker placement and pick up and deliver, special powers, all those sorts of things. What makes it unusual is that it's just a combination that I haven't seen in any other game. It doesn't feel quite like any other Euro game. It feels like it belongs in the same group, broadly speaking, but it also doesn't feel like this is similar to any other particular game. Thinking of other Euro games, Castles of Burgundy, I think feel similar to other tile laying games, like maybe something like Heaven and Nail. Um, I think something like Kalis feels similar to other worker placement games. Like you can find some similarities to something like Agricola. Um, this one just feels like it's its own game, and it doesn't quite belong in anything but its own category in some respects. It is difficult to predict. It's higher on the interaction, which is something that I've noticed about a lot of the heavier Euro games that are in my top 10, is they tend to be a little higher on interaction than some complete, everyone's doing something solo. Scythe is higher on interaction because you can directly go after each other, which you normally can't in a sort of economic Euro game that it is at its core. Uh, Puerto Rico has the ability to affect other players by choosing what basic action is going to be available to them each turn when it's your turn to do so. My top game has a fair amount of interaction. Um, Brass Birmingham, you can definitely affect each other in terms of where you place things when, and using other players' resources that they built, but that can benefit them as well, so it's positive interaction. I like a little bit more than bog standard play on your own player board and then compare points at the end Euro games. I like those games as well, But the ones that tend to rise above are the ones that elevate the level of interaction moderately. So, like, the level of interaction is sitting at like a 4 out of 10. I think that's sort of my sweet spot is there's a decent amount of interaction and you definitely affect each other. But it's not so much that you just completely ruin another player's game because you decide to target them. This is sort of where this one is, although you could decide to ruin someone else's game to a fair degree if you really wanted to. You just probably would both lose at that point. Um, the auction mechanism ensures that, but so does the fact that you don't have an equal number of the colors that are available, and which colors you decide to use where drastically affects how the game plays out. I think this is a really interesting puzzle, and it's really interesting in large part because it's hard to figure out exactly how you're going to get points by the end. You do have enough information to make some choices through the beginning and the middle of the game, but you still don't know everything, and there might be opportunities that you're not anticipating, and then you can sort of think and rethink your strategy on the fly in ways that could lead you to victory. That sort of mix between long term strategy and tactical choices is an enticing combination for me. Honestly, if this was my favorite game of all time, I would be perfectly content with that. Um, it's an amazing game. It's one of the best games ever designed. It's a really close to Scythe, which is part of the reason why I'm not sure if this was the one that was previously ranked at 2 or 3. Like, I don't know if I had them flip flopped on my last list, and I'm all I can see is that my notes say that this was previously ranked at 2. Its weight is about a 7, although that's kind of deceptive because it can be fairly confusing. And we'll play 2 to 6 players. I think more than any other game on my list, with the possible exception of my number 1, this is one I think you should try because it's a very unique combination of elements. If you're interested in game design, play this game. If you're interested in Euro games, play this game. If you're interested in why Euro games are boring and never interesting, actually, maybe you should still play this game because I think this one might sidestep some of the things that people complain about in Euro games and still maintain the flavor and the feel. The only thing is, if you're worried about it being not very thematic, it is not very thematic. It is almost completely themeless. It's something about Mayflower and like people coming over on boats, and I think someone said something on the internet about how they think the colors only go with each other, and so the yellows are all the French and the reds are all the English or something like that, and they don't speak the same language, so they can't work on the same tile together. That's really reading into a thin theme. Um, if you can get past the fact that the theme is thin, I think virtually everyone who plays board games at all, even if this isn't your typical style of game, should play this game. It's fantastic. Again, I would be perfectly content if this was my number 1 game of all time because it would be a fantastic number 1 to have. It's not close to my number 1. My number 1 is a number 1 by a substantial margin. So that is number 2, Keyflower. Let's go on to number 1. All right, you ready for this? If you don't know what it is, that's fine. But literally every spot on my list uh, had to be thought through, I think, because it wasn't obvious which one would go next, except for my number 1 spot. 2 and 3, it's hard to say. The rest of my top 10, I could easily reorder it differently on a different day. Going in through the 11 through 20 and then 21 through 30 and through the rest of the list, I can easily have things swap around. This was always going to be my number 1. This is Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica is the best game ever made, and if you don't think so, there's no real moral problem with that. You just happen to be thoroughly and completely wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. This is the best game ever made. Okay, you can complain that it's not thematic, but you are then just complaining that it isn't you are complaining that a fish isn't a good flyer, or you are complaining that a bird isn't a good deep sea diver. That is what you were doing. Because I don't know if there's a single game that attempts to do what it attempts to do as successfully as Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica is about creating a deep, variable experience in which you have a ton of options, and more added with the first expansion, that give you so many different possible ways of approaching the game. A tremendous variability in terms of things that are going to give you points over the course of the game. Variability in terms of how things play out, because there can be ways that you are beat to certain options, to certain powers. Um, it is a game that is tremendously difficult to strategize in, which means that it takes a while to get better. But as you do, you notice you're scoring like 10 more points on average than before, and now 15, and now 18, and it feels tremendously satisfying. This is a game I've played dozens of times, and I know that because I know I have played every faction in this game, of which there are 14, not counting the expansion ones, which I've played a handful of times collectively, of which there are another 6. But of those 14, I am 98% positive that I've played every one of them at least twice, and I know I've played some of them significantly more than that. So I've played this game at least 30 times, possibly a good chunk more than that. It's added a solo mode, so if I had that complaint about that game, that's no longer gone. This is quickly becoming one of my most played solo games. I said that Zolkin was a game I would be interested in learning to play at a more prolific, competitive level, and I said there was one other game that was like that. That other game is Terra Mystica. And it's because this is a game that has consistently got better as I've gotten better at it. I am nowhere near a top level player. I think anyone who plays Terra Mystica competitively is going to trounce me. The highest score I've gotten in a physical game of Terra Mystica, so against actual human live opponents, has been, I believe, 145 points. I've heard of at least one game where someone got 190. There's just so much to this game. Gaia Project is a terrific game, but it doesn't feel as honed down to the essentials of what makes it great in the same way Terra Mystica is. It feels like they gave Terra Mystica both an expansion and a redesign at the same time, and then they put that game out as Gaia Project. I mostly like the results quite a bit, but it still lags far behind Terra Mystica, because the one thing that they tried to fix in Gaia Project was not something that I consider broken in here, because it doesn't seem as apparent at the initial levels of play that going up the cult tracks is as important as it is, but once you figure out that that can be a major part of your income, in addition to being endgame scoring, that suddenly opens up factions that you wouldn't even consider before. This is a game that I could play. I think I could play this daily. If I honestly had time to play 2 hours a day, which I really don't, unfortunately. If I had 2 hours that I could set aside for Terra Mystica every day, I think I'd be perfectly content to do that. It's the one reason that I'm considering doing something kind of frightening to me, which is try to play this game online until I get better at it. Probably on Board Game Arena. I normally wouldn't even consider trying to do something like that. I'm thinking about it. like like if I can actually get to the point where I would do that. Just so I can have the experience of playing the game against live opponents and learning the game and getting deeper into it. I could nitpick a little bit about this game, and it would mostly be superfluous elements. I would say I don't particularly like the art style that they went with this. The component quality is, I think, pretty good for 10 years ago, which means it's mostly just okay-ish to maybe decent now. Um, the fact that there are unpainted wooden cubes as one of the resources, I've replaced the the cardboard money chits with metal coins for this particular version of the game because I just wanted to have something nicer to handle in playing the game. There are other ways to get the Terra Mystica experience. You could play Gaia Project, which again, I really like. You can play Clans of Caledonia, which I also really like. And maybe, although I rank it lower than Gaia Project, because it's a little further afield as far as a redesign than Gaia Project was, has more of a justification for existing than Gaia Project does, although I still think Gaia Project has its own niche in my collection. They're coming out with the Terra Nova version, which sounds terrible because they're simplifying away elements that were part of the magic mixture that makes this game so compelling to me. And I hear there's another Terra Mystica variant coming called Age of Innovation or something along that, which is going to be steampunk themed. And if the pictures I saw were accurate in terms of where the art style is going, I'm actually kind of excited about that because it looks like it could be genuinely pretty. And I've also heard a possibility of there being a Terra Mystica Anniversary Edition, which seems like it's like if it's coming anytime soon would be a little too close on the heels of the big box edition that they just released. Um, all that said, I still don't see anything toppling Terra Mystica. It is just such a tremendously, profoundly interesting, complex, meaty, thinky, interactive, poignant, superb, sublime, outstanding game. It is the greatest game ever made, and I cannot imagine liking a game more than I like this one. Maybe it will happen. I'm not saying it couldn't. I'm just saying I can't even think what that would look like because I'm not sure how I could feel stronger about a board game than I do feel about Terra Mystica. I won't begrudge anyone if they like one of the variants better, except maybe Terra Nova, the simplification. I don't understand why that one was, and I just watched the Dice Tower reviewer. They're like, well, Terra Mystica, but this simplified version is decent. I'm thinking like, why would you decrease perfection? Terra Mystica, um, is a game you should play. You should probably play it if you're going to play it for the first time at 3. If you're going to play it with me, I'm going to tell you to try to get somewhere between 75 to 95 points on your first play, and I will try to go for about 135. And I will couch it in those terms because I still think it's an interesting experience for me to play against you as long as you're playing to do well as you can and just have fun with the experience of the game rather than needing to win. If you need to win, find 2 other people who haven't also played it and try to win it by a score of like 95 to 90 to 85 or whatever. um this is also still one of my go-to games for introducing people to more complex games, and I've had a tremendous amount of success. I think some of it has to do with the fact that I think my enthusiasm for the game becomes infectious and people um, catch the passion a little bit. I could see how this could fall flat if this was played by 3 people who had played other games or like either a lot of other Euro games that are on the heavier side or almost none, and then we're just trying to go from the instructions to getting this played. Okay, if that's the circumstance, I can imagine how this one would actually could go over poorly. But I don't think it's going to particularly high percentage of the time because I just think this is just a master class of game design and everything that feels good about moving components and generating resources and getting an engine going and gaining momentum and having a special power that differentiates you from the other people at the table. All of that stuff is so tremendously powerful and present in this game that I think it's just an overwhelming winner of a game and basically may never be topped as far as I'm concerned. and you'll probably like Gaia Project better. But play this one first because it's easier to go from Terra Mystica to Gaia Project than to go from Gaia Project to Terra Mystica. So that's my recommendation. Play Terra Mystica if you haven't played it already. If you played and liked Gaia Project, there's good reason to think you might actually like Terra Mystica better anyway. I don't think it's a clear slam dunk case that Gaia Project is better. I mean, obviously. And same thing with Clouds Caledonia if you played that one. And especially if you played the new Terra Nova one, which I don't like to use this word too much, but can I say heresy? Heresy that this game exists. How dare you simplify perfection? Anyways, that is my number one. The best game of all time. Whatever you're thinking of is clearly worse than this. Terra Mystica. Well, so that was my top 10, and that wraps up my entire top 100 list. I hope that you enjoyed this entire list, and I hope you realize that, yes, the greatest game ever made is in fact Terra Mystica, and if you think otherwise, you just clearly haven't played enough Terra Mystica yet. That's not really the moral. I'm not sure what the moral is overall, honestly, except that apparently my favorite games are either well on the lighter side or well on the heavier side. Yeah, I'm just looking around at them now. Most of them are either heavier or light. No, I don't think I had anything from the medium weight shelf. So that's interesting. Thank you so much for watching this one. If you haven't watched the other ones, I can't guarantee that I will be as passionate if you try to watch the other ones now about the other 90 games in my list, but I'm still quite passionate about them. I still love those games a lot, even if they can't quite compete with these 10. Uh, and if you want to watch one long rant that's even longer than the one I just said about Terra Mystica, watch the 51 through 60 video, and it should be towards the end. Thank you so much for watching this. I will be doing this next year, I hope. And I might try to have a slightly different approach to how I rank my games, which could lead to a fairly different reworking of exactly where things are put. Thank you again. Have a good one. See you later.